Welcome back to Chaotic Crime. Chaotic Crimers? Chaotic Crimers? Should we do, no, that, I actually think I just gave myself the ick and we're 28 seconds in. But anyway, you know the drill. It is our monthly Monday Madness episode. And every month I drop an extra episode of a case that just drives me crazy, that I consider to be total madness, that I can't get out of my mind, that I need to vent to all my friends here once a month. So here's the additional episode and here's the additional case. Now, this case is going to make your spine tingle and your brain melt. Today, we're going to be talking about one of the most chilling, narcissistic, and delusional women I've ever researched. Now, this is about a woman who shot her own kids, plural, and she done it all to impress a guy. So welcome to the twisted and absolutely unhinged case of Diane Downs. She was a mother, a manipulator, a pathological liar, and honestly, just overall terrifying. So who was Diane before she made national headlines with that Crocodile tier media-filled tour that she gave us in her wonderful performance? What made her think she could shoot her own kids and get away with it? And what made her spiral into this madness? So let's go all the way back. So who the fuck is Diane Downs? Well, that kind of rolled off the tongue. Who the fuck is Diane Downs? So Diane Downs, who was born as Elizabeth Diane Fredrickson in 1955 in Phoenix, Arizona. Now, she was raised in a strict conservative home. And essentially, we already know the type. It was the church on Sundays, rules for everything, zero tolerance for rebellion. Diane's dad was a postal worker and her mother was described as quiet and obedient. But Diane essentially never lived that obedient lifestyle. She grew up feeling like a black sheep of the family. She was dramatic, self-centered, obsessed with attention, and even as a kid, she would lie for fun. And as she got older, the lies got bigger and begun to escalate. Her classmates described her as strange but overly confident. She had this kind of eerie charm and she wanted to be the main character in every room that she entered. Now, in high school, she went full rebel. She cut her hair short, rocked mini skirts, and completely ditched all of her family values. Now, it was in this stage of her life that she met Steve Downs, your classic high school bad boy type. And her parents hated him. Naturally, she was obsessed. Now, I don't know if anybody else can relate, but sometimes when your parents tell you not to do something, you just want to do it more, or you just become so obsessed. So put yourself in that mindset, because that's where Diane was. And Dad, if you're listening, I'm really sorry. I know I done a lot of shit like that just because you didn't like someone, and I just want to let you know that I'm aware, but there's nothing we can do now. So let's go back to Diane and Steve. So they dated, fought, made up, fought again, and essentially the entire relationship was toxic. But Diane loved the drama. And they actually went on to get married not long after they graduated high school. And Diane officially became Mrs. Downs. Now, at first, Diane and Steve did appear to be like your average young couple, trying to figure life out. But Diane had no real interest in settling down, and she got bored extremely easy. This was a classic Diane trait. She wanted the fantasy, but not the work that went into creating the fantasy. And when the kids came into the picture, let's just say that her mothering instincts weren't instinctive. So she went on to give birth to 3 children, Christie, Cheryl, and Danny. Now, instead of pouring all of her energy into raising them, Diane started bouncing between jobs and having affairs, like a lot of affairs. She'd leave the kids home alone, write journal entries about wanting to be free. She'd fall in love with men who didn't want anything to do with children. And one of the men that Diane begun an affair with went on to stand in the center of this story and the center of this murder plot. But we're going to get to all of that. So with all of Diane's affairs and all of her drama, Steve eventually left. He was like, peace the fuck out. I didn't sign up for this chaos. This is crazy. And that's when Diane went into full train wreck mode. Like it was a full-blown crash site. Now, later down the line, Steve did admit that he had concerns about Diane's mental stability, even in the marriage, before leaving, before separating. Now, while he didn't have a direct role in what happened after he left, he was absolutely devastated by what she did to their kids. Especially because in hindsight, and everything's great in hindsight, there were actually a lot of red flags, like a lot. So to recap on that is Diane was not a good mother. She was absent and she was incredibly involved in herself, and she was too wrapped up in her affairs and her own life and her jobs that she was essentially leaving these kids alone to raise themselves. She was absent and she never got her motherly instinct. It never came. So on May 19th in 1983, it's just past 10 p.m. and Diane pulls up to the emergency room of a hospital in Springfield, Oregon. And her red Nissan is soaked in blood. And inside the car is Cheryl, age 7, who is already dead. Danny, age 3, who's paralyzed from the chest down. And Christie, age 8, who is barely alive with a bullet lodged dangerously close to her heart. And then out steps Diane, who is wearing a light pink sweater, and she's holding her arm close to her chest with like indicating that she's got an injury, but she's holding it in a way that like you almost think it's just a scratch. Sorry if I'm stuttering a bit there. I'm just trying to paint a picture so that you guys sort of get what I mean. But she's essentially holding her arm, and her demeanor, we will definitely get into that. She's essentially acting like she just bumped her car on the curb and not like she just watched her children get gunned down. Now, she's not crying, she's not screaming, she's actually overly chatty at this point. She's flirting with paramedics, she's cracking light jokes, and she's worried about, wait for it, the blood getting on her car seats and the paint job. Yup. Very normal things to be worried about in this situation, guys. Like, I am not saying that there is any right or wrong way to handle this situation, but that is an absolutely bizarre way to be acting. And I have been so dissociated from my own mind and said completely outrageous things, but I still don't think I could ever get to that. And her story, Diane's story about how this happened, buck fucking wild. Buck wild. So this is the story. Diane states that some random bushy-haired man flagged her down on a dark road. He demanded her car keys, and when she refused, he had shot all 3 of her kids, somehow only grazing her. And then she bravely drove away. Like, come on. I know I've got hindsight now, I didn't hear this story and obviously wasn't a part of the investigation, but like, it just seems theatrical. That was really hard to get out. But it doesn't, it's not suspicious. It's theatrics. That's all it is.
Elizabeth Diane Downs says the family was on a sightseeing trip when a shaggy-haired stranger flagged her down and demanded her car. She refused, and the assailant Downs and her children at close range.
So the police and the hospital staff were absolutely stunned. Her energy was so wrong. One of the doctors said that she acted like someone who was inconvenienced rather than someone who had just survived the literal massacre of her children. And then we have Steve, who, remember, Diane and Steve are separated at this point. Steve, her ex-husband, arrives to the hospital, and this man is wrecked. absolutely sobbing and begging to see his kids, like in full-blown panic, the sort of panic that you can't make up. I think even if Diane had tried to pull the panicked act, she would not have been able to do it like Steve, because Steve's was real and it was raw. So when the police eventually spoke to Steve privately, he said what they were all thinking. I think Diane did this, is exactly what Steve stated. And boom, that's when it stopped being a mystery and started becoming a manhunt for truth, for justice, and for the real story of Diane's glittery, flirty facade. Okay, like what I normally do in most of my episodes, I want a pit stop for a second because I love a pit stop. We need a pit stop to check our oil, pump our tires up, get a grip. So we're going to do that. So while we're in this pit stop and we've got the people's pumping the tires and checking the oil for us, we're going to discuss what people were actually saying about Diane Downs and what it seemed like she was. So I know we did touch on this a little bit earlier, but I just want to get into it a little bit more because I think it's important for us to break down Diane Downs. So Diane Downs, by many accounts, was a mother in name only. And even saying that feels a little bit generous. To outsiders, she often played the role of the quirky single mum. But once you peel back all of those layers, her parenting was marked by neglect, manipulation, and emotional detachment. Diane's friends and co-workers noticed her talking about her children as if they were just mere obstacles in her life, not blessings. So her kids weren't described as blessings or the best thing in her life. They were inconvenience. They were pure inconvenience to Diane. She frequently left them home alone, and this was even when they were just toddlers. She seemed more focused on her love life, her appearance, and getting attention from men than actually parenting her children. Now, she did talk a lot to people about being trapped by motherhood and referred to her children as things holding her back in life. Now, I also just want to say that there's nothing wrong with saying that you feel trapped as a mother. Motherhood is a whole new phase and era of your life. I don't want people to get a bad taste about that. Obviously, your kids are going to hold you back from things, but I also think, and I'm not a mother yet, just a little bit about me. I'm not a mother yet, but I can definitely say that I don't think any of my friends that have children would describe it in that way, as like they're an obstacle or they're holding you back from things. Like maybe they're delaying things, but also I think kids really shift into perspective what is important in life. And I just don't feel like, and I think that's why this, obviously in all my research, this came up. I think that's why this came up, is because it wasn't said in a way where we're just being truthful and raw about how we feel about motherhood. And, you know, like we have those moments or those thoughts of shame and we just need to get it out. Diane generally just never got that motherly instinct at all by any account. So when she said it, I think she meant it. Like if somebody offered to take her kids, I think she would have been like, here, take them. So she wrote about freedom a lot in her diary entries. Diane kept a diary, by the way, and wrote quite a bit. And for her, the freedom that she was talking about was life without her kids. She wanted to be young and sexy and single. And 3 kids didn't fit that vision. And like we know, she wasn't a homemaker. She didn't enjoy the married life. So essentially, there was nobody around to really tell her that she was doing the wrong thing. No, I mean, there were obviously people in Diane's circle, but with Steve out of the house, really it was just Diane. Now, Diane could perform being a good mum when it suited her. She would dress her kids nicely for public outings. She would talk about them proudly and even bring them to work functions. But as we know, behind closed doors, her interest in her kids always seemed to fade fast. So Diane could put a performance on. She was a master manipulator. And I think that's why the red flags that we've discussed were missed. Or if they were noticed, they were swept under the carpet. I think one thing a lot of us can relate on is nobody wants to critique someone else's mothering too much. Obviously, when it comes to safety, people step in a lot quicker. But I think Diane knew how to play the part so well that there were never any direct physical indications of her piss poor mothering. There's no other way to put it. Okay, so pit stop on, we're full steam ahead and we're full in detective mode now. Our tires are pumped, our oil's been changed. We've even got new washer fluid in there in case any bugs slap on the windscreen along the way. We're in full detective mode. So buckle up. Because Diane is about to be exposed. Okay, so with Diane at the hospital, the police go to the crime scene that Diane had described, that remote stretch of road where she claimed a carjacker had appeared out of nowhere. And guess what the police found when they arrived to the scene? Nothing. No blood, no footprints, no bullet castings, no sign of struggle. It was like her bushy-haired stranger just evaporated into thin air and arrived making no marks. So the police are suspicious and they're starting to probably gather some own thoughts in their mind. So they then take her car and examine the blood spatter. So they bring in a specialist to do this, and the spatter doesn't line up with her version of events. The shots were clearly fired from inside the vehicle. So the police then begin to ask around friends, co-workers, families, and suddenly a new story of Diane starts to emerge. So it turns out at this point, Diane was obsessively chasing a man named Robert Nick Knickerbocker. Now, I'm not even fucking making that up. Don't even. I'm not even making. I shouldn't laugh, but Knickerbocker. Anyway, we're going to call him Nick. We're going to call him Nick from here on out. Oh my God, I shouldn't laugh. Keep it together. Keep it together. Okay. So Mr. Knickerbocker was a guy that she had been having an affair with back in Arizona. And here's the thing about Nick is he didn't want kids. Nick had reportedly been very clear on this. He had told her point blank he had no interest in being a stepdad, and he even broke it off with her because of her children. Now, according to friends, Nick had made it very clear that her children were a deal breaker for him. He had no plans of becoming a father figure, and he wanted a child-free, uncomplicated relationship. He was younger, carefree, and known to be living a bachelor lifestyle. So Diane, on the other hand, was deeply obsessed. So obsessed with Nick, it was outrageous. She was going around telling people that he was her soulmate. She would write to him constantly, and sometimes it was several letters a day. She wasn't shy about saying that she'd do anything to win him back. So what does Diane do at this point? With her obsession with Robert Nick Knickerbocker, she packs all of her kids up into the car and moves them to Oregon, and then begins the planning. So at this stage, the investigators had found her diary, and let me tell you that this thing was fucking wild. Pages were filled with ramblings about how much she loved Nick. Obsessive, delusional, not like your normal. He took me on an amazing picnic and I can't wait to... No, this was like delusional. Like to the point where they could probably do some scientific studies based on this diary alone. Full-on teenage horror movie sort of shit. And she even wrote about how her kids were reportedly in the way. Now, Nick would later go on to testify that he had no clue what Diane was planning. And when he had heard what had happened to her children, he was beyond horrified. He even told the police that she talked about her kids like they were obstacles. She didn't want to be tied down to them. So then comes the murder weapon, which in this case was a gun. And Diane had reportedly stated that she did not own a gun and she didn't even know how to use a gun. However, a .22 caliber handgun was linked to the shooting, and multiple witnesses came forward to say that she did in fact have access to that exact type of weapon. And here's the kicker. I mean, there's heaps of kickers in this case, but here's the kicker in the investigation. When the police tested Diane's hands for gun residue, there was actually no sign of residue on her hands, which seems suspicious, right? Except she was a postal worker. She had access to gloves. And timing-wise, enough time had passed that it could have been washed away before testing. But the real bombshell in this case, it came from Christie, who was Diane's daughter. So Christie and her brother Danny had survived the shooting. Danny was paralyzed, but Christie was okay and was half coherent as well. However, for some time, the trauma that the incident had caused her, she did lose her ability to speak. Over time, with therapy, she began to regain her voice again. And one day, she told the investigators what had really happened. And she said 4 words that shocked everybody. My mum shot us. Boom. The case cracked open. Police immediately went full force and arrested Diane Downs on February 28th, 1984. This was 9 months after the shooting. Now, the trial of Diane Downs begun in 1984, and if you thought she was wild before, buckle the fuck up. She literally strutted into court like it was her red carpet moment. Bright dresses, styled hair, and a full face of makeup every day. She smiled for the cameras, she waved at reporters, and even gave interviews during the trial. Her behavior was completely unhinged. The prosecution's case was pretty stacked, and it consisted of Christie's emotional and powerful testimony where she bravely took the stand and pointed directly at her mother as the shooter. Expert forensic testimony showing the trajectory of the bullets that matched Diane's position in the driver's seat. Testimony from friends and co-workers about Diane's disturbing comments, including saying that she wanted to be free from her kids. And her diary entries and obsessive letters to Nick. They even played clips from Diane's own interview, including the infamous hospital interview and her chilling, emotionless tone, which I've linked below, but I am going to insert now for you.
What haunts you the most about that night?
What do I see most is blood coming out of Christie's mouth, because that's what I see. I can't see Danny, and I can't see Cher. Sherry was laying on the floor, and driving to the hospital, I don't know the sounds that were made at the initial shooting because I was on the outside, and all I could hear, I can't hear anything but gunshots, and I can see things, you know, that's it. Driving to the hospital, I can smell blood. I can not hear Cheryl. Cheryl's not making a sound. Danny is just crying real soft. So that sound stays in my mind, and the fact that Christie's choking, and then I'm yelling at her and screaming at her to roll over on her face, because I was trying to keep her from choking on her blood, and it just didn't dawn on me that she was shot in the chest and that the blood was coming from her chest, not going down into her chest.
Yeah. Downs says her childhood and marriage flashed before her the night of the murder. Diane is the oldest of 4 Frederickson children, and she says her childhood is a great source of pain in her life. How did your childhood affect you?
Everything that happens to you as a child contributes to how you turn out as an adult. To be honest, it made me a better person because I know all the mistakes. I know what not to do to my kids. I know what to avoid. One thing is to not be married. And that may seem very harsh, but I honestly don't believe that children need fathers. And they're nice to have around sometimes when they can do things to help you, but when they are mentally abusive, when they are harsh, and the way my ex-husband was, they're more a deterrent to the children than a help. And unless you can find a good father, there is no need for them. And well, I was pregnant. So I was 20 years old, had 2 kids. Cheryl was colicky. My husband was a bastard. I'm sorry. And I had an abortion. And it was something that did not bother me for 2 years. And then I was at a fair in Arizona. I walked past a Right to Life booth, and they told me at the time that I aborted that I was 6 weeks. And I figured 6 weeks, that is a condition. You are not pregnant, that is a condition. It's a little ball of slime, you know, no big deal. It's a fetus is slime, I figured. I saw a 6-week fetus. That baby had arms, legs, fingers, toes, a head, eyes. That was a baby. It was a human being, and I killed it. And I felt so horrible about it that I had killed somebody like that. I didn't kill it myself, but I hired a doctor to do it. And so I asked my husband to have his vasectomy changed, reversed. He refused. I asked him for a year. He kept saying no. I said, fine, I will find a suitable donor. I watched people I worked with. I picked somebody that was attractive, that was healthy, that was not abusive of drugs and alcohol and such, was strong, you know, bone structure, the whole bit, a good specimen. It was really clinical. It was really terrible. And I seduced him. And I know my cycle, and it only took once, and I got pregnant. I went home, and about a week later, I told Steve I was pregnant. And he goes, how do you know? And I says, well, I know my cycle. I know I'm pregnant. And he was really upset. For that whole 9 months, he put me through hell. Every day, every night. It was terrible, just railed on me constantly, told me to get an abortion, the whole bit. And then after the baby was born, he told me, if you have a girl baby, I might let you stay around. But if you have a boy, I'm kicking you both out on your butts, and you're going to take those 2 with you also, because how do I know they're mine? That kind of attitude. Well, I lived with that for 9 months. Well, when Danny was born, Steve, the reason it had to be a girl was because Christie was supposed to be a boy. I was so cruel and mean I had a girl, and Steve just couldn't stand it. Got one more chance, Diane. Cheryl better be a boy. Well, Cheryl turned out being a girl. He came into the recovery room. He goes, well, where is he? I said, he's a she. He says, how could you do that? You know, we're not having any more kids. Crazy, flipped out. So if I was going to have another one, I better darn sure have a girl. Well, when Danny was born, he was a boy, and my first thought was, I'm dead. He's dead. What's he going to do to that baby? Everybody says you sure were lucky. Well, I don't feel very lucky. I couldn't tie my damn shoes for about 2 months. It is very painful. It is still painful. I have a steel plate on my arm. I will for a year and a half. The scar is going to be there forever. I'm going to remember that night for the rest of my life, whether I want to or not. I don't think I was very lucky. I think my kids were lucky. If I had been the way they were, we all would have died.
Elizabeth Diane Downs says the family was on a sightseeing trip when a shaggy-haired stranger flagged her down and demanded her car. She refused, and the assailant Downs and her children at close range.
When this man shot my daughter, my first reaction was to snap back to my childhood, to the pain that had happened to me back then, my marriage, my entrapment by society. This man was bigger than me. He was stronger than me. He had more power. He was in control, and I was not.
Now, if you guys want to go and listen to that full interview, if that intrigued you, like I said, I've linked it below, but definitely it's worth the full listen. There's a few parts, but definitely go and watch the full thing from start to finish. Now, the defense in this case was weak. They leaned hard into the mystery man narrative, saying that a stranger had attacked the family, but with zero evidence, zero eyewitnesses, and then, of course, Christie's testimony contradicting all of it. So the jury didn't appear to buy any of this defense. Now, another key moment was Diane's bizarre behavior in court. She showed zero remorse. At one point, when a graphic photo was shown of Cheryl's injuries, and remember, Cheryl didn't make it, Diane just stared blankly, with no emotion. Now, this trial lasted a total of 6 weeks, and the jury went on to deliberate for just 36 hours. In July of 1984, Diane was found guilty on all counts. And those counts were 1 count of murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, and 2 counts of first-degree assault. Now, she was actually sentenced to life in prison plus 50 years. And the judge made it very clear that Diane would not be eligible for parole until 2009. So this wasn't just a murder trial, it was a horror show, and Diane never stopped playing the lead. Now, just when you think this horror show couldn't get any more theatrical, think again. Diane Downs is involved, baby. And Diane goes into full Lifetime movie. She plays the role perfectly because while she is awaiting her formal transfer to prison after her conviction, Diane somehow managed to escape. Yep, you heard that right. This woman climbed a prison fence in broad daylight and vanished in Oregon. And for a long, strenuous 10 days, Diane was on the run. The media went completely insane at this point. National headlines, police everywhere, and people totally on edge. And where did they find her? Not in some remote hideout or even across state lines. She was hiding at the home of another inmate's husband, because of course she was.
She was apprehended, hiding in a nearby house with a former cellmate's husband. Diane Downs is now held in a maximum security prison in New Jersey, where she's working on her latest appeal.
She's destroyed so many people, and I think without one shred of regret. I don't think there's any regret in her body. That I don't think she's ever come to grips, with what's happened. I mean, the gravity of what's happened. The kids especially. She destroyed them. 3 perfectly innocent young children. Destroyed them.
So it's messy and embarrassing and a complete security failure. And Diane just acted like it was no big deal. Like it was all just a part of her show, and we're all on the Diane show. We all listen to Diane and do what Diane says. Now, obviously, Diane went on to be captured and put in prison correctly and didn't escape any further. So as of current, Diane is still alive and she's still in prison in California. Now, she was eligible for parole in 2009, but she's been denied parole on multiple occasions, and the most recent one was back in 2021. Each time she blames everybody else around her and still states that she's innocent. She's still writing bizarre letters and still doesn't seem to get it. Part of parole is to admit your wrongdoings and accept responsibility. Unfortunately, because Diane hasn't done that and is still proving to be innocent, despite the fact that there's no way. So because of all of those factors, she has been continually denied parole, which I don't think is a bad thing at all. Now, for the surviving children, and I already have goosebumps talking about this, it's like I just love a good ending, but also I've seen this in movies, and I don't actually think I've seen it in a case very often, so I'm getting all jittery just even talking about it. Now, as for Diane's 2 surviving children, Christie and Danny, they were adopted by the prosecutor on this case, Fred Hughey. I hope I didn't slaughter that. And his wife. So they grew up safe and loved and far away from their mother. Now, if this does sound at all familiar, I mean, there are a lot of movies that are based around this, but there is a movie that they turn this case into called Small Sacrifices, and I highly recommend. Unhinged doesn't even begin to cover it. So some of the unanswered questions we have about this case, because I think this case leaves behind more than just trauma. It leaves questions that rattle around in your brain for a really long time after you hear it. Now, was Diane always like this, or did she unravel completely when she realized she couldn't control people the way that she wanted to? Why were there so many red flags brushed off? Was it because of what we spoke about? Like, she had erratic behavior, she had an obsession with men, and she was obviously a neglectful parent. People must have saw this stuff. And how is it possible that after everything, the trial, the evidence, the survivor testimony, she still gets parole hearings like she's a reformed PTA mum? Because the truth is, I think that some people do just stay dangerous, and Diane is the true poster woman for that truth. This case will always haunt people, and I think that's not just because of what she did, but because of how smug she was while doing it. So like I said, if you guys do want a deep dive, I've put the links below for Small Sacrifices, which came out in 1989. It's available on YouTube. There's also a book by Anne Rule called Small Sacrifices as well, which I love a good book more than a show sometimes. So if you're more a reader, check that out. I don't know if the audiobook's available, but I dare say it would be. And then, of course, there is the full audio and some courtroom footage links available below, and they're on Court TV and YouTube. So what are we actually left with? A mum that was so obsessed with a man that didn't want kids, a man that ended things with her that could not let go, a woman that decided to unalive her children and call it romance, a woman who thought that being a cool, free-spirited hot girl meant casually shooting her children and blaming a fictional man with bushy hair like she was casting a bad Netflix villain, and a daughter, Christie, who literally survived being shot in the chest, learnt to talk again and stood up in court to say, "My mum did this," like a spine of steel. If this case didn't make you rage clean your house or scream into your pillow, congratulations. You're stronger than me. However, if it did, share it, scream about it, and maybe check your mum's Pinterest boards and old love poems just in case she's plotting something. I'm sorry, I just have to bring a joke into this episode at the end. I just have to. And as always, like we always end it, stay curious, stay chaotic, and never trust somebody who casually quotes poetry after a murder.
Why are you here?
I don't know. I don't know.
Doesn't that kill you?
No,
Why?
I'm a survivor. Sure, I could sit here and cry and be all upset. And what's it going to prove? It proves nothing. I am who I am, and I can't prove that I'm anybody other than what I am.
This statuette was found in Diane's apartment, inscribed at the base to Christie, Cheryl, and Daniel. "I love you, Mom," dated just 6 days before the Police believe this was not a gift, but a memorial, because soon Diane would be without her children.